advising clients across the country. Here he is, your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Hey, welcome back to the second hour of Something More with Chris Boyd. Joining me this hour, I've got a special guest. We've got Bob Powell. Now, Bob, I'm going to give a little bit of your resume here for our listeners. Bob is a longtime columnist for USA Today, Market Watch. He's the editor of The Street's Retirement Daily. He's host of multiple podcasts such as Exceptional Advisor, creator of FinStream TV, and all that content you're in the thick of, I think. Editor of Retirement Management Journal, director of retirement education for Sensible Money, curriculum director and adjunct instructor for Elder Planning Specialist Program, and founder of Parting Glass Productions. Bob, welcome back to the show. But I don't know. Do you ever have time to sleep? I mean, that's a lot of activity you're involved in. Good Lord.
Well, yes, of course, I do have time to sleep because it's not as if all those things take up all 8 hours of my day each and every day. So I work on them. Well, I don't think anyone would want my life because it is a lot of spinning plates.
Yeah, you definitely got a lot going on. Well, anyway, thank you for making the time to be here.
Pleasure.
And you just said you're just back from Vegas where you were at the CPA's conference with moderating a program there.
Yeah, so I went to, for the first time ever, the AICPA holds an annual conference that they call Engage. And I don't know the exact number of CPAs there, but there were, I'm guessing, upwards of 3,000 CPAs. The conference lasted from Saturday through today, Thursday, the 8th of June, when we're recording, and sessions throughout the day, 9 concurrent sessions. And I had the luxury of moderating a panel discussion about my favorite topic, retirement. And I had 3 wonderful subject matter experts join me, one from the Society of Actuaries, one from Employee Benefit Research Institute, and then one of my co-instructors from the Elder Planning course. And we got a chance to talk about.
We've had her on the program in the past too, and Annalee's great.
Annalee is just remarkable. We'll get to talking about a little bit more about caregiving in a second, but sure. We at the conference. So among the things about this conference that was so remarkable, you may well recall Bob Merton, MIT professor, Nobel Prize winner. Typically when Bob speaks, he's the keynote speaker. Yeah. But at this conference, he was one of 9 speakers during their concurrent sessions. And I couldn't even imagine ever inviting Bob Merton to be one of 9 speakers instead of the keynote.
Yeah.
But that's the power that the AIC
that kind of intensity has. Now, where would you mention to me before we got started that you'd recently had an interview with Sharpe, the creator of the Sharpe ratio. How did that come about?
So it came about in my role as editor of the Retirement Management Journal, which is published by the Investments and Wealth Institute, which markets and the CIMA designation, the CPWA designation, the RMA designation. So each issue, sorry?
One of our team members, Jeff Tamaning, is a CIMA.
Yeah, it's those are 3 great designations that, in addition to the CFP, just add to, one's body of knowledge around financial planning, investment management, wealth management, or retirement planning. And anyway, so with the Retirement Management Journal, each issue we do a Q&A with people we identify as visionaries in the world of retirement planning. And we were fortunate enough to interview Bill Sharpe in our last issue, where we had the pleasure of talking to him for an hour about retirement planning. And you may recall the famous quote from, right?
Yeah, that must have been fun.
Oh, it was fantastic. The famous quote that Bill Sharpe, though, has is, retirement planning, retirement income planning is among the most gnarliest problems that you could ever face. And we always thought, well, if there's a problem for Bill Sharpe to figure out retirement planning, what chance do us mere mortals have when it comes to building a retirement income plan?
Right, right.
And what was interesting is if you go to Bill Sharpe's website, he's created, and I haven't been able to figure out how to do it, but in essence, there's a free book that teaches you how to build a retirement income plan using these complicated math formulas. And if you're so inclined to sort of figure out if you could return Bill Sharp's serve, you can go there and figure out how to do your own retirement plan using his spreadsheets.
Wow.
I was not able to do it.
Well, that's one of the great things about having a show, and you have a show and all kinds of outlets like this, where isn't that one part of the fun of being like a host with or an interviewer? You get to talk to some great minds and some really interesting people.
Yeah, I refer to it, Chris, as psychic income, right? It's sort of like it's part of the job, but it's one of those things that, you know, I sometimes joke that I used to have a friend who sold batteries to, you know, whatever, CVS and pharmacies and whatnot.
Yeah.
And he'd come home from work and tell me about how many dozens batteries he sold that day to whomever, wholesaler, et cetera, retail shop. And I would tell him, oh, well, I had lunch with Peter Lynch today, or I met, you know, Warren Buffett at the Gillette annual meeting, or, you know, today I talked to
Yeah.
Bob Merton, Nobel Prize winner, you know, for 5 hours, if you can imagine that.
So it didn't seem to quite live up to the same
Well, you know,
his
it was a fine living. It's just a different way to make a living. But for me, I would rather have spoken to, like I said, Peter Lynch, Warren
great
Buffett,
people.
Bob Merton than sell CBS a dozen batteries.
Wow, that's pretty fun stuff. And so, you know, today we want to talk a little bit about retirement. This is your area of expertise. There's a lot of things to be talking about and thinking about. It's certainly the focus we have with our clientele. We work with people approaching or in retirement. So where should we begin? What do we want to talk about to start us off?
So much to talk about. Let's, if you don't mind, we'll start on spending, right? So when I think about retirement income planning, a lot of people sort of begin the conversation by saying, well, how much will you spend in retirement, and what's essential and what's discretionary? And so I think that's always a good place to start. And one of the things I've become really intrigued with is some of the research around this area that seems to suggest that what advisors are doing may not be in the client's best interest. And we can talk more about that in a second. And I'll be curious to see what your experience is with your clients too. But if you go back a couple, I don't know, maybe 10 plus years or so, David Blanchett was famous for doing some research that is often referred to as the SMILE research, where he took a look at what people are spending in retirement and in essence said they're spending throughout the 3 phases of retirement, throughout the go-go, slow-go, no-go years, actually declined on a real basis from the go-go to the slow-go years, and then maybe slightly increased during the no-go years as their healthcare expenses sort of became more prevalent as a line item in their budgets. And then follow that up with other research that's been done by other numerous researchers. Michael Hurd at the Rand Corporation recently published a report that said spending declines on a real basis throughout the course of retirement by about 1 to 2% per year. Center for Retirement Research at Boston College issued a similar report. And then, you know, one last report that I'll make mention of is the JP Morgan has something called the Guide to Retirement. And what they've done is looked at the actual expenses of Chase customers throughout their retirement. And they too also notice a decline in spending on a real basis after inflation over the course of a retirement period for their actual customers. And that got me to thinking that, you know, advisors, and you may not be doing this, but we'll talk more about it, is, you know, historically people have said, oh, what you should be doing is withdrawing 4% from your portfolio on an inflation adjusted basis over the course of your retirement to meet your desired standard of living, whatever that might be. And if that's the case, people may be withdrawing more money than they need because they're not necessarily spending with inflation. They're actually spending less throughout their retirement. So if an advisor is using maybe off-the-shelf software and not making adjustments for real spending, then, you know, we may be faced with situations where people don't need the income because their spending is declining. And that I'm curious for your reaction, Chris, because I'm looking at it partly as from the role of a journalist and researcher, as opposed to someone who's actually advising clients with real money.
Yeah. I find that, well, first off, when we talk to clients about this in their planning and so forth, it varies. I generally prefer to, unless we find that we're challenged by the prospective outcome, pardon me, we tend to refrain from referencing the smile or slowing down which in reality I think is the way it actually happens. But we try to project to have enough without engaging those tools and techniques. The programming software that we use gives us the ability to make adjustments like that. Should we find that, gee, do we have enough, or is there really enough? Then we get a little more granular and take a look at it. When it comes to the actual application of how much people derive and withdraw, as a practical reality, we might set out with a plan. Here's what we're going to do. And we have included various expected withdrawals for a car and travel and, and so forth. But in reality, it doesn't actually happen the way the plan was set out in its origins. Something, a family member gets divorced and lives at home and our cash flow needs have changed, or a pandemic occurs and we didn't travel. We didn't use the car as much, or whatever, right? Yeah. There's practical realities that cause people to say, well, it didn't happen exactly as planned. So I think, in our case, it's more a matter of going with that reality. And as time passes, adjust, reassess. Are there things that we need to, how's it projecting out now? Are there things we need to be worried about? Yeah. Or it still looks fine, kind of a mindset. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. And I find it interesting because I think that's the approach that needs to be taken, which is we have a plan, but we need to monitor and adjust it as we go, because especially, again, I'll refer to the JP Morgan study with actual clients. Yeah. And you sort of reference it. Spending, especially during the early years of retirement, can be a bit lumpy, right? You take that trip that you always wanted to take, or you replace the roof that you always needed replacing, or you buy a second home or whatever it might be. So it's really hard to accommodate the potential that says, oh, my plan is 4% per year adjusted for inflation, which sounds great on paper, but in reality, it's probably never anything that happens in reality.
Right. And then, of course, the timing of one spouse's passing doesn't happen on schedule generally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We've got sort of a hypothetical what if here, what if there. But as a practical reality, that this we don't know when mortality will be an issue and how that will affect the surviving spouse. And I mean, we can plan for what if, but how that actually comes together. And of course, markets are a variable. We've got, the Monte Carlo simulation of, the range of possibilities, but, where are we at a given moment in time?
Yeah. So three things to mention. One is there's a recent research report about Monte Carlo that sort of grabbed my attention. Was written by Derek Tharp out of, I believe, the University of Southern Maine, where he actually said that you could set a Monte Carlo at 50%, right? Success rate or failure rate, however you want to describe it. And as long as you're monitoring it and adjusting it each year, you'd be fine at a 50%. And, the advisors I talk to, and I'm curious what you do too, is, maybe you're setting it at a 90% or 75% success rate. And he's arguing that it could be a virtual coin toss, whether what your Monte Carlo simulation success rate should be.
Yeah, I think that's a very challenging, because on the one hand, we don't want to, we don't necessarily want to have this mountain of money left at the end, but as a practical reality with people living longer, and I think it's for most people, not everyone, of course, but, we certainly have people who have the likelihood they're going to be left with a lot of money to for their heirs or whatever. But I still worry about people having enough.
Yeah.
And, so I'd rather err on the side of caution, and have a 75 or 80% probability as a target, and be more comfortable with the likely outcomes. And of course, the ability to adjust if things deviate from that, the positives of that. Yeah. And, shooting at that mid mark. And what if we don't quite make it,
Yeah. So that brings to mind another thing that came up during our discussion was the Bridget Bearden from Employee Benefit Research Institute. They've done quite a bit of research around retirees, and one of the things that she mentioned was that they studied what the planned date of retirement is for people in their research study versus their actual date. And what they found was that by and large, people were retiring sooner than their planned retirement date, which then meant that they had to have a longer time horizon to fund their living expenses in retirement. And and then the second thing was for people who said that they planned to work past retirement in some form, part-time, full-time for pay, that only half of the people who said that they wanted to keep working after they retired were able to do so. And for
That's really
reasons having to
interesting.
do with healthcare shocks or divorce or layoffs or whatever it might be. So our best laid plans around retirement dates and working in retirement are uncertain, which means that, like you said, maybe a higher Monte Carlo success rate is needed because the odds are it may not go according to plan.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it's funny you say that. I think anecdotally, it feels to me that, pre-pandemic, we had more people who were, saying, I'm going to retire at this age and then maybe overshoot the mark where they worked a little longer and, that kind of thing, and still enjoyed the income and, maybe slowed the pace or whatever it might be. But it feels to me that more in the post-pandemic, if I can call this post-pandemic, people are more inclined to want to make a change sooner. They want more lifestyle. They want, they're really I don't know if it's because of the pandemic or if it's just people are exhausted, or spent of some kind. But it just feels to me that more and more people are kind of like saying sooner would be better.
Yeah.
And that's not all in all cases, of course, but I feel like there's more of that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And Bridget from eBree mentioned that one possibility is that they actually now have enough to retire, right? That they've been able to say well,
better, and
I do have enough.
Possible.
The other interesting thing is Michael Finca from the American College, one of the top 3 retirement researchers in the United States. I had a chance to have drinks with him in Las Vegas. He was one of the speakers as well.
See, here we go again, right? Just like I'm just teasing. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's awesome.
I was once accused by Bob Veris of being a interminable name dropper, but like that's who I talk. Like, what am I supposed to do? That's who I talk to.
And it lends some credibility to some of these points.
Right.
Absolutely.
So he and I were talking about bucket lists, and he asked if I had one. I asked if he had one, and I said, well, I think it's important in part to have a bucket list because once you get to be, age 65 or so, you're looking at on average, maybe 8,000 days of life left.
Wow.
Right. And if you had to think about it that way, you would want to make sure that you're getting the most out of each and every one of those 8,000 days, because tomorrow it's only going to be 7,999 days. And after that, 7,998. Right. So we're dealing with a finite number of days. And, maybe for some it's 10,000 and for others it's 6,000. But nonetheless, you're in the home stretch here. Right. So, do you want to spend your time with your nose to the grindstone working for the man, or do you want to go visit national parks or, whatnot?
Well, when we were preparing and I was thinking, one of the things you had mentioned was the issue of risks in retirement. Mm-hmm. And in an abstract sense, that was one of the risks I thought that we should talk about, is not having a sense of purpose. And, the idea of a bucket list, kind of fits into that notion, but the challenges of, it's not all just financial stuff that we, think about. It's, what am I moving toward? What's my life about? What are the things I want to achieve, and I think that's really important. My father-in-law is just about 80, and, he retired at one point, I forget now, a decade ago, maybe, or maybe longer, but in that neighborhood. And he stayed home for maybe 6 months watching the news. And he's like, I got to get back to work. You know, he just like, initially it was like a vacation and he enjoyed a little bit of time off, but then I think he missed the interaction, the people. I mean, I can't imagine he's doing it because it's a paycheck thing. It's because it's a people, it's an interaction. He feels a sense of purpose and accomplishment and all of that, and for some that's work, for some that's volunteer, for some it's golf or whatever it is, right? Boating or tennis or, fill in the blank, whatever your particular passion might be. But I don't know, pick that up wherever you like.
I think that the biggest problem that people have is that they retire from something and not to something. And so they ought to spend a serious amount of time thinking about what they're retiring to. And you're right, it could be spending time as a grandparent. It could be time spent in your garden. It could be time volunteering for your local senior center or whatever it might be. But I think you really need to think about how you spend your time in retirement, not just how you spend your money. And so often people, joke about this notion is, oh, I can't wait to golf, full time in retirement, until they realize that, golfing full time in retirement becomes less enjoyable and more of a job the more you do it, because
Right.
so I don't think that's the answer for most people. And pickleball might be, but you're probably going to end up with more fights than you thought you would.
Yeah, or in my case, injuries.
Or injuries.
Yeah.
But I think spending time doing that, and for many people, what's so interesting, I'll give you a couple, 3 examples. When we mentioned the Retirement Management Journal and interviewing Bill Sharp, and one of the last questions that we ask each and every person that we interview, whether it's been Alicia Minnell or Olivia Mitchell from Wharton, or Moshe Bilevsky from York University, Bob Merton at MIT, no matter who we've interviewed, we always ask the same question: when do you plan to retire? Because all of them are still working, and none of them have plans to retire.
yeah. These legends, but they just love what they do.
They love what they do, and that is their purpose. So I think for some of these folks, I think it's okay. When I think about retirement, I think I'd like to do some of what I'm doing today because I so enjoy it. But there are 400 national,
but maybe
there are
less
400 national parks, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be fun.
Time's a wasting. So I want to go see.
You're gonna make a point of seeing them all? Is that what you're saying?
Wouldn't that be nice? But time's a wasting. Each of those 8,000 days go by, and I'm down to X number of days to see all 400. So I don't need to see all 400, but I certainly need to see the ones that are
the big ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. That's a great point.
And also the other thing too, I'll add is I feel like there's a chance, even when you're working, to practice retirement. So in my case, I volunteer for 4 boards now, which is something I would do in retirement anyway, but it gives me a chance to sort of have it sooner, right? Sort of practice retirement so that you're not waiting until the end to do some of the things that you might do when you actually leave the workforce.
I think that's good counsel. Yeah. You mentioned earlier, we started off talking about spending in retirement as some of the things that we wanted to think about. And, in very simple terms, I was thinking 2 broad categories. Spending too much is what we focus on, not having enough, to get through the years that we need it. But, we said in the last hour, one of the things we were talking about is the idea that oftentimes people need permission or affirmation that it's okay to spend, and oftentimes people spend maybe too little. I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but you follow my point. That, it can, there's an anxiety that they have about having enough. And or oftentimes, particularly retirees well into their retirement are focused on making sure their kids are well served. Or oftentimes we see people with a sense of stewardship. Well, my parents gave me this, and I want to make sure that I get, that kind of thing. That there's a passing it on through the generations. But I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about that notion?
I think that's a great topic, because you're right. People, I mean, if people knew their date of death, they would probably spend more freely, right?
Yeah.
that the money only has to last, whatever, X years or whatever it might be. So you don't know your date of death. So how do you manage longevity? And I'll start by saying that people technically don't. And Steve Deshane I have to give credit to him for saying this, that people don't necessarily run out of money. They run out of lifestyle, right? They just gradually spend less as they age. So, they can preserve whatever wealth that they have for however long they might live. And I think, what would be interesting is, when I think about the risks of retirement, longevity being one, inflation being, the other twin peak of retirement risks that you need to manage. Research done by Michael Finke and David Blanchett have looked at, adding in their research an annuity to manage the risk of longevity so that you never run out of money. And that would give you a license to spend more now, knowing that you would never run out of money.
This came up in the last hour, and that some planners have a real strong vision of the importance of that base level. We generally at our firm are, skeptical about the use of annuities generally. But when it comes to that pension style immediate income, there really is a school of thought that says, hey, let's at least cover these necessary expenses and then have some risk with the other part of the portfolio in a way that can help us keep up with inflation and so forth. And it's more our discretion to how we use it, that kind of thing.
I'm often reminded of, right, Farrell Dolan, who was with Fidelity, had created the 4-box strategy, which I think is a really simple way to explain to people is we're just trying to match guaranteed sources of income with your essential expenses and your non-guaranteed sources of income, your stock and bond portfolio, with your discretionary expenses, which would maybe cover whatever discretionary expenses you might have, but also manage the risk of inflation and not making sure that that you don't have a decline in your standard of living, right? Loss of purchasing power.
Bob, you're probably one who's looked at these and probably more knowledgeable than I. In the Secure Act 2.0, there was some content that related to these longevity annuities. I've never seen anyone use one. I've never come in contact with one. I'm just curious, what's your take on these? Just this wasn't a planned question, but just out of curiosity.
No, I think
your view on it.
If you're thinking about QLACs, the qualified longevity annuity contract inside your retirement account, or you're looking at a deferred income annuity outside your retirement account, those products have a place. It's just that there's no take up on them, I think, in part because they're complicated to understand. And people, as you sort of mentioned before, I think at times are distrustful of the product, in part because there's not enough transparency around them, like what the expenses are and whatever. I happen to think that they're neither good nor bad, but they're a tool to be used for a specific sort of need that might.
Well, I think there's also the reality that as a society, we generally don't want to defer our interests. Like the idea of like putting money aside for when I get there, should I get there? We're more about immediate gratification. Really, anyway. You know what I mean? So that's another variable.
I sometimes think, and I propose this, that, and Moshe Milevsky has sort of, I think, said the same thing, which is, if you knew your date of death, these are date of death products. So for instance, I'll give you the example. Let's say that you had a deferred income annuity that began at age 85. Well, then you would say, I've created a plan that gets us to age 85. And if by chance you live past that, we've bought insurance to cover your income needs.
That seems reasonable. That. Yeah, that seems like a reasonable thought process, as a way to think about it. I just haven't really looked into them all that closely, and I was curious. So you seem to be neutral on it. Could have a place.
I think it. Yeah, again, like So for me, I always think of it like you're not a hammer, and not every person that comes to you is a nail. Rather, you're a toolbox, and you have to use the right tool for the right facts and circumstances, right? And someone. Yeah. It's interesting. I can't say that I'm a big fan of it, but Wade Pfau has developed this tool called the Retirement Income RISA, it's called. And what it does is it identifies your preferences for certain types of income solutions, based on whether you want certainty or volatility or commitment, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a way of saying, we're going to find out, all things being equal, whether a deferred income annuity is would be your preference. Now, it may not be the right thing to do for you, but we're at least going to identify what kind of products and strategies you feel most comfortable with.
Yeah, that's a good point, because there are wide ranging views of comfort when it comes to risk, right? And one person would be uncomfortable not taking risk, where another person would be uncomfortable taking a lot of risk, and so it's fine trying to find that balance.
Right. And I think, the thing about it is, we don't live in a world where, the only thing in your toolbox is a hammer, right? We now have, all right,
lots of choices. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So you have maybe a deferred income annuity or a QLAC. Maybe you have a reverse mortgage, or maybe, you've, maybe you've laddered, tips, right? Or whatever it might be. You've got lots of tools to accomplish, the goals, whatever the fact and circumstances.
What we often say to people, it doesn't have to be an either or approach to things. For most people, there's a blend, it's finding the right mix. All right, we should take a quick break. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with about another 15, 20 minutes with Something More with Chris Boyd right after this, and our guest, Bob Powell, staying with us. All right, welcome back to Something More with Chris Boyd. Here with Bob Powell. Great guest. Loving our conversation, Bob. Thank you for coming on the show, especially with your busy schedule. Hearing all about that, my goodness. But anyway, we talked about a variety of things for our conversation. Risks in retirement and the need for an elder plan were among the things we wanted to also talk about. What do you want to start with? Is it okay to transition? Was there anything else?
Yeah, no,
I think spending.
I would just say, if you haven't had a chance, the Society of Actuaries, I always think about planning for retirement is all about the reward, right? Building up a nest egg. And then I think about retirement is all about the risk that you're going to face in retirement. So we mentioned longevity, right? We mentioned inflation. You mentioned change, spending shocks a second ago. The Society of Actuaries, years ago, when they first began looking at this, they published the 16 risks that you'll face in retirement. Chris, 16 risks that you're not even thinking about, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I think it would be well worth your listeners going to the Society of Actuaries site and downloading they have a guide to retirement
risk. A few
risk.
of the highlights of what those are.
Oh, sure. So we mentioned inflation, interest rate risk, longevity, post-retirement employment, changing housing needs, change in marital status, divorce, death of a spouse, remarriage, public policy changes, right? We're about to witness maybe the sunsetting of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and changes to the estate planning, requirements. Significant healthcare needs, cognitive decline, unforeseen needs of family members, which you just mentioned a second ago, bad advice, theft and fraud out there.
Wow.
So all these needs. And what they do in a booklet is to say, here's the risk that you'll face. Here's the probability of it happening. Here's the ways in which you might manage and mitigate that risk. And, typically it involves maybe, I joke, avoiding some of these things, right? But you can't avoid the death of a spouse, perhaps, right? That's going to happen. But you could certainly do things like insure or hedge or transfer the risk. As ways to sort of manage some of these things. So give that a look-see. It's
that was the Society of Actuaries and the risks in retirement.
Yep. And I'll give you the exact name of the book. It's called Post-Retirement, Managing Post-Retirement Risk Strategies for a Secure Retirement. And it's a 36-page booklet that it's sort of, on my desk all the time when I think about what to write about or what risk I haven't written about. So I recommend it. Good. So elder planning. Let's talk a little bit about this.
Before we go to elder planning, just because it's on everybody's mind these days, inflation has been something we hadn't talked about for 20 years or whatever as a worry. But certainly it's been on everyone's mind over the last year. Do you think that, what are your thoughts around, this as a risk? Is this something that is likely to be sustained? Is it likely to be elevated relative to what we've endured over the previous, 20 years or whatever?
It's a tough one, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah. Well, I do think we're in there are some systemic structural kind of changes in the sense of over that, the prior 20, 30 years, we've been in an increasing free trade environment where we've had the benefits of, reduced cost from labor by outsourcing and all of that, going overseas for just in time, all that, all this stuff we've kind of become familiar with. The world is flat topic, and now I don't know if the world's getting rounder or something, but we seem to be moving toward more deliberate about where and how, and I just think that's likely to have some consequence when it comes to inflation as part of it.
No, I agree with you. And I think, for all these years, how many decade plus, right? We talked about the zero interest rate policy environment and that too cut both ways, right? On the one hand, the cost of living was low. On the other, so were savings rates, Social Security benefits. I think there were 3 years where there was a 0% COLA, right? You didn't get a COLA.
That's amazing, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So, and so on the one hand, yes, the cost of living was low. It didn't, necessarily impact your purchasing power. And now we're in an environment where inflation is rising. Short-term savings rates are rising, right? You can get a 12-month CD now for 5% or so.
Yeah.
And so, it's,
when I started in the industry, in 1990, I started as a life insurance agent. We used to talk about 3.5% as the long-term average of inflation.
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder if we're headed, more toward that kind of an environment again.
Yeah, right. Which sort of just begs the issue of what do you have in your toolbox to sort of manage the possibility of inflation staying as high as it is, or rising, or even falling, right? And that always calls for best case, worst case, probable case sort of situations when you're doing scenario planning, I think. I would sort of, the one thing I'd say is I think people also need to be conscious of the fact of what nominal rates are versus what real rates are. And, people always talk about, back in the, whatever it was, the late 70s or so, and
80s.
Right. And rates were at 18, 19%. And, wasn't that great, except for what was inflation back then too. And, were you actually, on a real basis,
percent.
Right. So were you actually, were you actually behind the 8 ball during those years when you were getting 18% on your, savings account?
Yeah. If you bought long-term treasuries at that point, I guess you were brilliant, but, probably not everyone did that.
No. So I think people just need to be conscious of, are you keeping pace with inflation? Are you ahead of it on a real basis, or are you behind it? And, and what have you done to sort of manage it? Some people will say, well, I need to add more, I don't know, REITs in my portfolio, or maybe I need to add, I don't know, alternative investments in my portfolio to manage this risk of potentially higher inflation. Of course, there are trade-offs in doing that strategy too. But again, like, what are the tools available to manage the potential for higher inflation than we have today, or inflation as it exists today?
All right. Well, anyway, just curious if you
that probably was probably too mushy of an answer for you, but I don't.
Well, I think it's just I think it's one of these things to be watched as a reality.
And I have to say, I hate to prognosticate, like, as long as I've been in this business, I don't, I'm willing to bet that my crystal ball is as good as Jamie Dimon's, right? Or is as good
absolutely
as mine.
fair. I mean, this is one of the things that you we'll have to watch and see what happens. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So you started to transition a little bit to elder planning, and we have, a little less than 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. So this is inescapable, right? This notion, we're aging, we're living longer, where the likelihood of living longer with some sort of healthcare need is growing. I just finished, by the way, Chris, a 4-day fellowship at Columbia University, where we looked at caregiving as a topic, which was described as the $500 billion problem in the United States.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, and on top of the immense, like, aspects of, like, the aging demographic, the costs that are coming with it, there's the labor shortage of people to solve it. Anyway.
No, the labor shortage, the costs are rising there. If you were to hire a home health aide for transportation needs, you'd have to book that person in 4-hour blocks, even though you might only need them for an hour, right? And And because of this labor shortage inside assisted living facilities or nursing homes, sometimes you actually are having to hire companions to go into the facility, which adds an additional cost to the room and board cost that you cost in paying at the nursing home or assisted living facility. And so I think it's really incumbent on everyone to start thinking about, well, when I don't have diminished capacity, what plan do I have in place to make sure that my desire, right, to not be a burden on my loved ones actually happens, right? And so that may mean thinking about, what is diminished capacity? What kind of legal documents do I need in place? I just did a 5-part series with Harry Margolis on all the legal documents that you might need to have in place. And those include some of the things that you already probably have, right? Durable power of attorney for financial matters, healthcare proxy or durable power of attorney for healthcare matters, living wills, medical directives, DNRs, MOLS, HIPAA releases, right? All those documents need to be in place, and you have to have conversations with the people that you've appointed as your agent, whether it's for financial matters or healthcare, to say, what it is I want. Should I become incapacitated and unable to make decisions on my own? What are my end of life plans? Right? Have I talked to my children and spouse about what those plans will be? Have I written an ethical will that not only discusses, my financial wishes in terms of what I want passed down, but what do I want them to know about me as a person and my values?
Yeah, the values part of it. Right? When you're passing, yes. Susan, I can't think of her last name.
Susan Turnbull. Yep.
Turnbull does a great job with that.
Such a great job. Such a great job. So she's part of the course that we offer, the elder planning course. Right now, it's being offered through the Financial Planning Association. We're happy to say we're just finishing up our first cohort with the FPA. And it's been remarkable because one of the things that we do is we ask the students as part of their final exam to create an elder plan, either for a family member or for a client or for a fictitious client. And we just went through the students presenting their final plans to us. And there was a woman in the class who presented what I had to say was the finest elder life plan I had ever witnessed in all the years that we've been teaching this course now. And it's great because if FAs are now sort of incorporating this into their practice, they can offer a service that is so needed because you've had Anna Lee Kruger on your show. She's dealing with people who haven't put plans in place typically. She's dealing with crises. And when you talk to her, right, the stories that she tells are heartbreaking. She told me a story just the other day about one of her clients. She noticed that the spouse was caring for the husband who had dementia, but she was running ragged, and the children lived in other states. And then it came to pass that they hadn't heard from the mother. The children hadn't heard from the mother in 5 days. So they drove to the house 5 hours away, only to learn that the mother had died and that the husband, because he had dementia, didn't know how to use the phone or contact anyone to say that his wife had died. So she had been dead for 5 days. You don't want this to happen, right, in your life,
awful.
right?
That's
terrible, but it's true. It happens,
right?
And so this notion of saying it's not going to happen to me is
so frustrating, Bob. We have people come in and they don't want to deal with the financial realities or challenges, and they're real. They're challenges. I mean, it's not an easy answer, and there's not an obvious solution of, just buy this policy, or it's challenging.
Yep.
And so, there's a pillow involved, there's a gun involved, there's all these, like all these ideas of, just shoot me, just whatever.
Yep.
But it's not really how things play out in these circumstances. I don't know if I often reference the book, the movie Still Alice. Do you remember?
Yeah.
That's a great depiction of, she's kind of got a plan.
Yep.
But the plan doesn't happen the way she envisioned for how, just because things progress and it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is a very challenging topic. And of course, nobody likes to think about the what ifs of these kinds of issues.
No.
But as you do get later in retirement and later, that late stage of retirement, these are things you got to plan for. And when it comes to where you live, that's a big part of it. The kind of Do you have a residence that's going to allow you to stay at home longer? Should you, because that's what everyone wants to do.
Yep.
You know, would you be benefited from looking into continuing care retirement communities, or, you know, alternatives, assisted living of some kind? You know, nobody wants to give up autonomy. You know, that was one of those, forgetting the name of the book now, but, you know, great, the guy in Boston who's, anyway, never mind. I'm not as good as name dropping, but but the idea that everyone wants to retain their autonomy.
Oh yeah, was it Being Mortal? Like
Being Mortal.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I've not interviewed him, but I would love
yeah,
to.
you're gonna get him on your mix. Yeah. I would love to get him.
You should get him on your show.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it's such a challenging.
So, and I'll mention this one thing, Chris, I think it'd be important too, because again, right, it's sort of about holding the mirror up and facing reality. So I'll mention I'll name drop one more time. Michael Finka had done some research years ago. I'm fond of quoting it at any chance I get, which is he looked at how our cognitive abilities decline, just decline naturally.
Naturally, yep.
But our confidence levels in our decisions actually, rises.
Yeah.
So I always say, look, as you get old, you're increasingly confident about the wrong decisions you're making.
Right. And this isn't just about investments. Yeah, I'm interpreting this around investments,
Everything.
which I think is very apt. Yeah.
So, think about that as you think, okay, well, what's it, again, and I always say, the number one thing that older people say is, I don't want to be a burden on my children.
Right.
Well, if that's the case, what would you do to avoid that from happening?
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in your list of not only documents that people need to think about, but all these various considerations. I'm sorry we've run out of time to be talking about this stuff with you, Bob. It's just such great content. Always great to talk with you. You stimulate the mind on these issues. Let's just mention, Bob, what do you have for people to follow you, check out? I mean, there's so many ways you're putting content out there, but
I'd say we talk about that. The big two is retirementdaily.net, which you can find on the street, and then finstream.tv, where we're producing and distributing mostly short form videos designed to teach people about money.
Great content. So again, finstream.tv. Sort of a video channel.
Yeah.
And then, but all about financial education, great content. And then the streets, Retirement Daily.
Yeah. And that would be retirementdaily.net is the quickest way to get there.
All right. Excellent. And of course, you're all over social media and things like that too, I'm sure. But
yeah, please. Yeah. Feel free to link in with me. I love LinkedIn and love meeting people there too. So.
All right. Well,
thank you, Chris.
Thank you for making the time. We'll hope you'll come back as well.
Thank you.
So, again, want to wrap up. If there's anything you need from us in talking to you about your own personal financial planning, particularly about these issues relating to retirement, we'd love to talk to you. I am one of the certified elder planning specialists that Bob, one of the courses that Bob is actively involved with, one of the key people engaged in the development of that program. But, hopefully we can be of help to you if you're dealing with some of these issues. In any case, if you want to reach out to us, you can connect with us through our website, amrfinancial.com, or give us a call, 866-771-8901. Until next time, keep striving for something more.
You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd, Financial Talk Show.
Asset Management Resources, LLC, and J. Christopher Boyd, CFP, provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is in the nature of general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. AMR, LLC cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.